What's up guys, Justin here with the SketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp extension tutorial for you. So last week I did a video on using Artisan and Profile Builder to create a site and a building. In this video I wanted to talk a little bit more about how I created the smart building in my model that automatically fills in things like your structural framing and your skin and stuff like that. So before I get started, I do want to take a second and thank my supporters on Patreon. Patreon, as you know, is the crowdfunding support website where you can support creators that you like on YouTube. So if you like what I'm doing in this channel, please consider checking that out at the links down below. Alright, so part of the reason I wanted to do this video is because a lot of you guys purchased Profile Builder and Artisan or the bundle over the course of Thanksgiving and that sort of thing. I wanted to do a few tutorials on this because I know a lot of people now have these extensions. I wanted to teach people how to use them. I believe they're still on sale at the MindSight Studios website as well. I will link to those in the notes down below. Full disclosure, I am an affiliate for Profile Builder and Artisan, so if you do end up purchasing either one of those, I do receive a commission. So the way that Profile Builder works in general is it works in two different ways. It works by extruding profiles, so things like shapes. So if I was to draw just like a box straight up and down and push-pull it, that's extruding a profile. So it extrudes things along paths, and then it also repeats different objects, usually components. And so what we're going to do is we're going to couple those two things together to create some buildings and kind of see what we can make with this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create kind of a frame and skin type structure. And so what I need is I need two different things. I may end up with three different things. But what you need is you need the profile of the skin that's going to get extruded as well as the structural members for the object. And so we're going to do two different things in order to work with this. So we're going to start off in the assembler dialog. The assembler dialog is where you can create assemblies. And assemblies is basically the combination of different objects that you're going to repeat. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click the plus button to create a new assembly. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this frame and skin. And so you can see there's two different tabs in here. There's profile member and then there's component. So profile member is the object that gets extruded. Component is the object that gets repeated. So let's start off and add the component. And so in this case, we're going to click the plus button for add component. And I'm going to go ahead and use the pick from model option. So I'm going to go in here and you can see how this will give me a little green check mark when I mouse over the different objects. So in this case, I'm going to click on this truss. And you can see when I do that, that adds this truss in here. And so that's where we're going to start. So you can see how now, just generally speaking, if I was to just add this in here, you can see how this is adding a series of trusses. And my spacing is all kind of messed up on this. We're going to work on that. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our rotation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this drop down for 90 degrees. And you can see how when I set this drop down for 90 degrees, what happens is now this is adding objects in here at a 90-degree angle along this face. So you can see how it's going 90 degrees here, basically from whatever point. And it's basically adding this truss framing in here. And what it's doing is it's adding these trusses at a certain spacing. So for right now, that spacing looks like it's set at about 8 feet. Let's go ahead and check that. So if I click and drag in, or if I click in here and then click again, you can see how it's about 8 feet from this point where I start until my next truss, plus or minus a little bit. And so that's how we're going to repeat our truss in this model, is by doing that. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the assumption that I can probably go about 20 feet. And so you can see how I came in here with my spacing and I changed that to 20 feet. And then I just clicked out of the box, and you can see how this updated when I did that. So now, if I use this option for build assembly, You can see how now what that's doing is that's bringing these trusses in here at a spacing of about 20 feet. And so what I can do is I can adjust the attributes of this object. So if I click on this object and then I come in here and I adjust my spacing, so let's say I set that to 15 feet. As long as I have this object selected, if I click this Apply Assembly Attributes, you can see how that's actually going to adjust this so that my spacing is now 15 feet between my different structural members. So you can use this spacing option to set that. And you can adjust some other things as well. You can adjust like the setbacks and that sort of thing, which we're not going to mess around with too much. Basically, what you could say is you could start this at a certain length from whatever your point is by adjusting the setbacks. So now what we're going to do in this assembly is we're going to add a profile member. So I'm going to kind of move this out of the way a little bit. And so this is kind of our sample object. But what we're going to do now is we've added our component into this object. Well, now we want to add the profile member. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add the skin on the outside of this as a profile. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Profile Builder dialog. All right, so what we want to do in this case is we want to go in our model and we want to select this face for our skin. We want to click the little plus button. And we're going to come in here and we're going to call this skin. And so when we add a profile for skin, what that's going to do is you can see how this generated a preview of this profile. Well, if we come in here and use the build option in order to extrude that, that's going to extrude that skin along a path. And there's a few things about this that aren't quite right yet that we need to go in here and fix, but this kind of gets us started. And I'm actually going to close my assembler for a second. And you do want to make sure that you save your assembly. So in this case, I'm just saving it in my in the file where I'm keeping my video stuff, but you may want to create an actual folder for Profile Builder stuff if you're going to reuse it over and over again. What we're going to do is we're actually going to adjust our skin a little bit. So if you look in here, this little red point adjusts where our profile comes in around where you click. So right now, if you click, your base point for the object that you're extruding is at this red point right here. Well, what we want to do is we want to click this drop down and we want to select the bottom right option. So before it was at the center. So if I click and move this, you can see how my base point is right in the center. But if I move this to the bottom right and then extrude it, you can see how now my base point is at the bottom right of my assembly. And that's what we want. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to save that. We're going to save that as a profile. And you can put that wherever you want. Just put it somewhere where you can find it. So now I've saved that as a profile. Now we're going to go back into our assembler and we're going to add our profile member into our model. So you can see how we already have our structure in here. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to click the plus button, and I don't think I have this profile in the model, so you're going to have to go through the actual Profile Builder dialog. But all you have to do is just go find that. So just go find the folder that you were using. And any assemblies that you have in there should show up. So in this case, I'm just going to click on this assembly and I'm going to select it. And you can see how that has kind of the attributes of your profile and everything else in here. If you just click OK, then that's going to add that skin to your model. So you can see how now in my preview, the skin is actually showing up in my assembly. So if I click on this assembly now, if I select it, and then I click Apply Assembly Attributes, you can see how what that does is that's actually generating the skin in my object. So if I was to create a new profile, that's going to generate my structure with my skin. And you can see how there's a few things that aren't quite right with this. Like it's offset a little bit from your center, and it's also set back by about the length of one truss, which is approximately 4 foot. So we're going to make a couple quick changes on our profile member. So basically what we want to do is we want to adjust our start setback, and we also want to adjust our left-right offset. So our start setback in this case needs to be 4 foot. So if we click on this object now and adjust this, you can see how that actually adjusted this the wrong way. Well, what we want to do is we're actually going to set this to -4 foot. We'll click out of it and then click the update button. And you can see how what that does is that gives you an offset of -4 feet from wherever your start point is. So that just gives you an extra 4 feet of this assembly that's getting extruded that covers this structural framing. So now when we generate this, the skin is actually covering the entire structure. But then the other thing we need to do is this is off by, we'll take a guess on this one, but it looks like it's off by about 9 inches left to right. And that's just having to do with where your base point is on these two different objects. All we're going to do is we're going to adjust our left-right offset, and we'll call it 9 inches for now. And then we'll update our assembly. You can see how when I updated my assembly, that moved this to the right. So now my skin object is centered on top of this truss. And if you wanted to, you could also do an up-down offset of maybe 1 inch or 2. If you really wanted this flush to this object, you may want to offset it more like -4 or -5 inches. But if you do that, that sits a lot closer to your structure right here. And so you can see how you can use this to generate a smart structure. And then the last thing we could do is, let's say that I was to come in this object and create a back wall. So all I would do is just draw across this face, and I'd right click and I'd make that a component, and we just call it back wall. So we'd create a component for our back wall, and then we'd come in and we'd add that component. In our assembly dialog. And I guess I can go ahead and close out of this profile option because we have our profile kind of set. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to click the Add Component option, and you're going to just select Pick from Model, and you're just going to pick that back face that you added. And I'm going to go ahead and update this object just so we can see what that does. You can see how that's not bringing that in the way that we want it to bring it in. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to uncheck the boxes for everything except End. And then we're going to click Update. And you can see how what that did is now that's only bringing that object in at the end of this building. So now it's only bringing in one of these at the end. So anytime you generate this, this will just be your back wall is all that it'll be. And we're going to go ahead and select a 270-degree rotation on this one. So you can see how when I select that 270-degree rotation, what that does is that rotates this so it sits on this back wall. Alright, so basically what you're going to have to do is you're just going to have to set your left-right offsets. So I had done some scaling in here that I probably shouldn't have done, so that made everything not match up quite right. But basically all you have to do is you just have to set up your left-right offsets and also your up-down offsets so this all matches what you're trying to set up. So in this case, the other thing we can do is, since this is a component, we can just go in and edit our component and adjust the orientation of it because it's not standing up right here. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to stand this component up. And you can see how when I stand that component up, that gives me my back wall. And you can see how that adjusted my original in here as well. That adjusted the actual orientation inside the component itself, but that's getting stored inside the component. So now if I come in here and I draw a new version of this building, let's say I draw it on the green axis, and we'll call it 80 foot long. That's going to generate a building with trusses and a back wall. And no matter how long I make this, it'll put the back wall in. So Now I'm going to go ahead and click the Save button. So now that assembly can be brought in just by importing it through Profile Builder in any model. So, and then real quick, because I feel like this video may be getting a little bit long, so we could also use this to generate a structural steel building. And so the way that we would do that is we would just come in here and we would create a new assembly, and we could go ahead and call this steel building. And probably the way that we would have to do this, we could just repeat this component. So we would do a little plus to add our steel post in our model. And so first of all, you can see how just by not touching anything, that's going to generate a series of posts in here at whatever spacing you set. So you can set that at 8 feet, you can set that at whatever you want. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that in there as my first post. So we can just call that post number 1. And then we're just going to add that component again, and we'll give a left-right offset of 20 feet. So now, if I do that same thing, it'll give me a series of posts in here at 8 feet on center, and I'm actually going to adjust that to something like 20 feet. And you can go ahead and click on this object that you're creating and click Update, but for each one of those, you could set those at a spacing of 20 feet. And then just click the Update button, and you can see how that's quickly adding these in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and create one more. We'll call it post number 3. We'll do the same thing. We'll select this post. And in this case, we'll give this one a spacing of 20 feet. And we'll give this one a left-right offset of 40 feet. So now, I'm creating 3 rows of posts in an object. So, and you could do this for as many rows as you want, and you could use this to generate kind of infill framing. Or you could use this to generate like steel framing in an object. And so then the next thing we would want to do is we would want to create a profile for our structural steel beams. So we could add a profile in here, and we click the plus button. We call this one I-beam. And I'm going to go ahead and set this to bottom right for right now. And we'll just save that. So we'll call it our I-beam. And then we would add that as a profile build. We would add that as a profile in our model a couple times. So if I add that as a profile, you can see how that's going to add that on the ground on this object. Well, what we would do is we would give it an up-down offset of, I think we said 13 feet, and then update that. So that puts this up here at 13 feet. And it kind of depends on how your framing works. In this case, probably, what did I give this? I gave this a depth of 8 inches. So I would probably do 12 foot 4 inches. So that this is kind of flush with the top part of this. I'm just letting it intersect with these objects. And so then we could add that a couple more times. And you can see how this is updating as I go. So I'm just adding this I-beam over and over again. So in this case, this one would be at 40 feet, and it would still be at 12 foot 4 inches. So now, if I come in here and I click on this, and I update it, it's adding those steel pieces in here. And I think it gets a little bit tricky doing the left to right infill. Probably what I would do in this case is I would actually model out some 40 foot long I-beams. So probably I would use the Profile Builder dialog, And I would go ahead and generate a couple of these beams this way. I know I'm getting some some overlap in here. In this case, for what we're trying to do here, I'm okay with it. But probably what I would do is I would create a component. I'd call it 40-foot I-beam. And then I would add that into my model as a component. So I do a pick from model, add my 40-foot I-beam in here. Give it an up-down offset of 12 foot 4 inches. And probably I would go ahead and just give it a left-right offset of 40 feet. And then click Update. And you can see how now I can generate a building with structural steel framing in here that automatically infills with the spacing of whatever I set. So there is some setup involved, but you can see how once you get this kind of figured out, this gets pretty easy to do. And the one thing you'd probably need to do now that I look at this, and you need to get pretty good at just coming in here and updating things just by looking at it. So in this case, I'm off by about 4 inches. So probably I'd need to give it a start setback of 4 inches. And you can see how when I do a 4-inch start setback and I click the update button, this moves this over by 4 inches, and now all of this lines up. And then the next thing you could do if you wanted to is you could add a steel deck that extrudes along this face. So you could set that up on top of your structural steel, and you could have concrete go in. You could do the skin as a profile along this face. So once you kind of get an idea of the way all of this comes together, it gets really easy to create some cool shapes and have some cool ideas of stuff that you can do with Profile Builder. So it's a very smart system. So that's where I'm going to end today's video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Are you interested in Profile Builder? Do you have some cool ideas for what you could do with it? I just love having that SketchUp conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing in this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. You can check out that link in the notes below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.